Hello, world.
And the world says hello back.
Are you the world? Are you speaking for the world?
Hello, Jeff.
That's not what the world sounds like.
Yeah.
So, Steve, how is your NCAA tournament bracket doing?
I've got one of my final four gone, so I guess it's not terrible, but not ideal.
Gotcha.
I
That's
still,
all. That's all I have.
yeah, I have Bama winning it all, so I'm still all right there. But have UConn making it to the final four, have Houston making it to the final four. I lost Duke.
We all lost Duke. Yeah, I have UConn winning it all. So, boom, it's gonna happen, baby.
That's all that matters, right? At least
Yeah,
they're still alive, right?
yeah. The cows in Stores, Connecticut, are gonna be thrilled when they win it all. Anyway, but my bracket. Here's the thing: my bracket is so bad that even if they did win it all, and I'm the only one that picked them to win it all in our pool, I'm pretty sure I'd still lose. Like that's how bad my bracket was. It's kind of remarkable. I had Virginia beating Purdue in the. I had Purdue beating Virginia in the Final Four, and then UConn beating Purdue in the championship game. I also had Arizona. I had Virginia beating Arizona to get to the Final Four. It's not. It's again. It didn't go well.
That'd be a wild instance. I don't know if I've ever seen that happen before, where somebody picked the winner of the bracket, but everything else was just garbage, so it didn't mean anything.
You're gonna see it because it's gonna happen. UConn's gonna beat Arkansas tonight. That's what I like to say. Arkansas. Okay. Anyway,
Who knows? You might end up closing with the big points. Then you never know.
no, I mean I did the math. It won't work.
Okay.
It can't happen. I'm last. I am last in that bracket pool. Anyway, there's only like 12 people in it. But anyway, this is a podcast about the Saints, so we're gonna talk about that. Even though I do want to get out of here so I can go watch my UConn Huskies at 6:10. So we're gonna cruise through this. We're gonna do some mock drafts. We're gonna talk about some defensive backs and all that good stuff. And then we're gonna answer your questions. So if you have any comments or questions, throw them in the chat now, and we will keep track of them and bring them back at the end and answer them. As always.
Seeing a nice little crew rolling in here for a 3:35 on a Thursday.
Yeah, see, an afternoon stroll, a siesta, if you will.
Yeah, I don't know. We definitely need to take more siestas during the day, which would be much appreciated. I could definitely use a nap, like a scheduled nap.
Yeah, I saw a meme the other day that was like how you feel after like certain amounts of sleep, and it was like 2 hours, I feel great. 8 hours, I feel great. 4 hours, kill me. Which is very accurate. I don't know why it is. Anyway, okay. I thought we were kind of vamping to get people in here, but no one's here. But that's fine because we do this for ourselves. So Steve, whenever you're ready to get going here, we can start the podcast.
All righty. Here we are inside Black and Gold. I'm Steve Geller along with Jeff Nowak, and we are. Last time we talked, we didn't get into a few new free agent signings for this Black and Gold team. We actually put together our mock draft 2.0s that we'll get into as well. And when we close things out, will be a fun mailbag edition with whoever comes into the March Madness edition, Sweet 16 of our Inside Black and Gold podcast.
Yeah, let's go with that. This is our Sweet 16 pod. UConn's gonna win it all. Don't worry, it's gonna happen. It's happened before. It'll happen again. Anyway, yeah. So we're gonna get going with kind of the rundown as we have decided to call it. We're gonna go through, hit a bunch of the news that has happened since the last time we recorded, which was on Monday, and there have been a few things that happened. As Steve mentioned, we both have our mock drafts, so we'll do that in the second segment. And then the final segment, as always, we're going to do the live mailbag. So anyone watching on YouTube, make sure to get those comments or questions in there, and we will get to as many as we can in the back portion of this program. But to start, we can start with the signings that the Saints have made this week. They brought back defensive tackle Malcolm Roach. They signed offensive lineman Storm Norton, which sounds like a fun name that must have a very fun story behind it. But when we talked to him this week, it was the most boring story in terms of it was the most boring naming story relative to the interesting name that I've ever heard. So much so that I don't even feel like it's worth telling. Do you want to hear the story, Steve?
I feel like you've enticed the audience now. You must relay this info that is so pertinent.
Apparently, his parents went to like a baseball game. I don't even know. It might have been like a Detroit Tigers. I honestly don't know. And there was a pitcher. His name was Storm. And they decided at that moment, when they have a son, they're going to name him Storm. And that's where the name came from. That's it. That's the story. Storm Norton.
I thought it was going to have to do with the general, Norman Schwarzkopf. Storm and Norman.
Yeah, right. I don't know.
Anyway. It did not, though. It was completely something different.
Yeah, so Malcolm Roach coming back, I think that's relevant, right? That's good depth on the defensive tackle position, which you needed. You obviously have already signed Colin Saunders and Nathan Shepard, and you're just going to kind of build out that position. Storm Norton's going to be depth on the offensive line. If he ends up starting, you're in trouble. But then the other two I think are interesting, and you had cornerback Lonnie Johnson Jr., who is listed as a cornerback, but he actually played more snaps at safety last year than corner. And these are both guys who played for multiple teams last year, which is kind of interesting. And then former first round pick, number 27 overall pick in 2019 of the then Oakland Raiders, Johnathan Abram, who is a safety. And it sounds like, when you talk about his role, is going to be a big special teams contributor. And I think both of those guys are going to be interesting to watch in terms of someone's got to play the slot. And I think one of those two guys is going to end up kind of in that role, or at least in that rotation as the season goes on, kind of like you had last year, because you didn't really have a dedicated slot corner. It was kind of a rotation of guys. And I think both of them could potentially get in there.
It's like Dennis Allen couldn't help himself with Abram. He had to have that Raiders connection, right?
Yeah, I guess. He wasn't. I mean, he got drafted to the Raiders 5 years after Dennis Allen got fired. So there's no connection whatsoever. But yeah, no, I think part of it is Johnathan wanted to be here. He's from Mississippi. He referred to it as his hometown team. He told a story about how when he was a kid, he went to a Saints game. They played the Falcons, and he was yelling at Joe Horn, give me a ball, give me a ball. And then later in the game, he caught a touchdown from Aaron Brooks, and Joe Horn gave him a ball, and he still has it. So he is a Saints fan. And so he's home playing for the Saints. So it's not quite a Tyrann Mathieu or a Jarvis Landry homecoming story, but it is pretty close. He played for Mississippi State. If we're being honest, he probably grew up closer to New Orleans than Jarvis Landry did, out in Covenant, Louisiana, which I couldn't even point to on a map. So are you impressed that I know Jarvis Landry, Louisiana, off the top of my head?
Sorry, you broke up there. I heard you say something about Jarvis.
You're breaking up with me. I said, are you impressed that I know Jarvis Landry is from Covenant, Louisiana, off the top of my head?
Definitely a man of all parishes.
Yes, I know. Yes, all the parishes. Anyway, so yeah, and I think one of the reasons you bring these guys in is because they fill kind of this role that the Saints are kind of fascinated with. I think in terms of the secondary is they want one guy who can do at least two different things, maybe more. And PJ Williams has not been re-signed yet. He might still come back on that 1-year deal that he always comes back on, but I think these might be the replacement signings if you were ready to move on from PJ, who I think had a down year last year relative to what you were hoping for. He's a veteran. He's been around for a while. I just don't think he was giving you enough last year. You could still bring him back, but I think that's what this is geared toward, is kind of getting a little more athletic on that front. And you hear both of these guys talk, and that's really what they hammer is I'm willing to do anything. Here's what Lonnie had to say when asked, whether he thinks his better position is actually safety or corner.
No, it really don't matter with me. Honestly, that's the God-given talent that I have, and that's what he had instilled in me to be able to play multiple positions, which is a blessing. I just got to go out there, like I told them guys, man. I just want to focus, hone in on the playbook, learn as much as I can. So whenever it comes, whether it's matchups with tight ends, whether it's me playing in the middle of the field, slide, me going the outside at corner, like I just want to show that I can do them all and do them all at a high level and perform at the best level I can for the team.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, he's 6'2", he's strong, he's athletic. And so I think if you're the Saints, you're looking for a guy who can do multiple things, who can play in the slot, who can go outside, who can just be that kind of all-around depth. And I think that's what you kind of have in him, even though he hasn't been able to latch on with anyone the last couple seasons, it seems like.
Yeah, the versatility is always key. I think, Dennis Allen does a really good job of being able to, find the right piece for the right job in his defenses, and has made a lot of guys even more multiple and versatile than I think they expect it to be. You bring up a guy like PJ Williams. Well, I definitely don't think we can write him off yet. Obviously, no. I don't think anyone's breaking down the door to sign Peach right now, and it'll probably be a pretty relative cheap 1 year, again, another 1 year deal. But he has a versatility value to him as well. Plus, someone that has been around, someone that is familiar with the ins and outs of everything that Dennis Allen wants to do. But yeah, the problem is obviously he might be getting up there where his abilities are not even to say that he was the greatest DB to have on this team, but he was definitely a piece that could come through in a pinch kind of thing.
Yeah, and I mean, I would be surprised if he ends up anywhere else, right? Like, I think he's a guy who knows the Saints system and they can bring in at any point and feel comfortable with. So I wouldn't be surprised if maybe he even lands on the practice squad, kind of like Chris Harris did last year, and you just kind of use him for a free elevation 3 times a year, and he still gets his paycheck and he still sticks around.
It could even be something depending on the relationship, like Detroit. I could see Aaron Glenn say, "Hey, you know what? Come on over here, PJ Williams." And if they had a good rapport with each other, even with anybody like the other co-defensive coordinators that are now gone to, there could be other tentacles coming for PJ. But I just feel like, yeah, he seems like a guy that's going to be New Orleans from start to finish.
Tentacles. That's an interesting term. But yeah, so one other connection before we move on, Johnathan Abram, he was teammates in college at Mississippi State with JT Gray, so he knows him very well. He also knows Tyrann Mathieu previously. They talked after he signed. Tyrann, every defensive back or defensive player, honestly, that signs with the Saints talks about Tyrann Mathieu, and it's kind of interesting when you kind of dive into it, because he's basically he's a player that a lot of these younger defensive backs grew up watching and modeling their game after. Like, Lonnie said that he always kind of modeled his game after Tyrann Mathieu, just kind of a taller version. And his career honestly was weird because he got drafted to the Texans the year that Tyrann left Houston and went to Kansas City. He got traded to Kansas City last year, which happened to be the year Tyrann left and came to the Saints. And now they're actually on the same roster. And it's just kind of funny to hear these guys talk about it. But here's Johnathan Abram kind of talking about how he fits in this building. And I do think it's interesting because you're talking about a first round pick who has basically been cast off as, I mean, I don't want to say a bust, but no one was climbing over themselves to give him a lucrative second deal. Like, he said that he had other teams interested, but I don't think at the level that you would have hoped after being the number 27 overall pick. And so, the Saints are getting a talented player, but I do think they are benefiting from the fact that, like, there's no ego coming in. And I think this soundbite from Johnathan kind of underscores that.
I mean, I don't really take it personal, more so, like you say, I just try to figure out how I can help contribute, because it's not really about me. It's about helping the team win, no matter what team that is. And the goal is to win a Super Bowl, no matter where I'm at, who I'm playing for. So, trying to just do my small part in such a big role as because it's a team sport. It takes 11 players on each side of the ball at all times to contribute and do their part to make sure things turn out how we want them to. So, as far as handling the adversity, I don't really think it was adversity. It was just more so me. The biggest adversity was just me moving, from home to home. As far as trying to figure out how I fit in on each team and what I can contribute and what I can help bring to a team, that never changed. Like I said, simply just trying to do my job and just do the best I can and just being who I can be. Making the guys around me better.
Yeah, and so you could hear Bobby kind of chiming in there. Those are both interviews from Sports Talk this week. Well, I think Lonnie was actually last week. No, Lonnie was on Monday. I can't remember. I'm losing track of the days. It's Thursday. So if you want to hear those full interviews, they're both on YouTube. If you want to kind of read more about these players, there are features on both of them at wwl.com. So feel free to go check those out. And I think that having a first round talent who's willing to show up and go all in on special teams is all you need to know in terms of why the Saints were willing to bring Johnathan Abrams in, right? Like I'm having a hard time not calling him JJ Abrams, and I'm having a hard time not calling Lonnie Walker. It's a struggle every day, but I'm trying to avoid it. But I do think Justin Evans signed with the Eagles. He was a guy who you had in that rotation last year. And I think both of these guys serve similar roles in the defense that you feel really good about.
Yeah, the definite key piece being, you mentioned versatility, obviously, with these guys being able to play a couple of different spots in the secondary for the Saints. And, I think that Justin Evans had a decent first season here in New Orleans. I know there were some lows, but I mean, you could say that pretty much, I think, about everyone. But I thought that, he showed a lot during training camp and kind of was someone that was a contributor during the season, but really didn't have any huge, big flash plays, but I thought was a solid piece.
Yeah, no, he made the team, right? Like he played his way onto the roster. I do wonder whether he would have made the roster had CJ not been traded, right? Like I think that when CJ got traded, it kind of locked him into a spot. And that's how he got on the field, was in the slot. And, in some games when there were safeties out, he would get on there. Marcus May missed several games and he got a lot of run at free safety. And I don't think he excelled in that position. I think he was better in the slot. But yeah, I mean, he played reasonably well. He played as well as you could have hoped. And I mean, the Eagles paid him. So they clearly felt like they liked what they saw.
They lost CJ Gardner-Johnson too now.
Yeah, whatever team gets rid of CJ Gardner-Johnson is going to put Justin Evans on the roster. That is the deal. But all right, moving on. One other thing that we learned about this week, and I don't really have much to say about it other than I'm looking forward to going out to LA, is the Saints are expected to have joint practices with the Chargers this season, which it's a common joint practice team. I think they were out there in 2019 and I think 2017 as well. So these two teams are pretty familiar with each other. But yeah, I think that's going to be week 2 of the preseason. So that's all I got.
No, that's definitely a prime setup they have over there. The Chargers in LA, and I hope you get to stay. We had to stay at the Westin out in Los Angeles last time, and I made it a purpose to bring my laptop out to the pool because of the sights were so damn gorgeous. From the ladies attending to the sights you see around with the city, it's a good time. And I love joint practices just because I feel like you even get better work than a preseason game because you can come back and go over even a drill again if you want with someone.
Yeah, no, I think you do get more out of these joint practices than you might in a preseason game, at least for the starters. Like a lot of the depth players, you'll get more out of a preseason game because you're playing full speed because you're trying to make the team. But for like a Marshawn Lattimore, these are the only real reps he's going to get in terms of like, maybe outside of like one or two plays in the final preseason game, but he's going to have real reps in this setup. Michael Thomas, another good example. I know they were out in Green Bay this past year.
It's funny you mentioned Marshawn because even if he were to get in a preseason game, he'd be like, man, I'm not running. This is
you're playing off coverage. You're not jamming anybody. You're not doing anything
don't mean a
that
damn
might
thing.
lead to an injury. Like you're just making sure you can still run and stuff. But yeah, I'm surprised more teams don't do them. Honestly, they have become more popular. But all right, two other things we want to get to. One is kind of just a mind-blowing, like bizarre story. Foster Moreau, who the Saints had in on a free agent visit, former LSU tight end, New Orleans native, started Jesuit. He was going through a physical with the Saints medical staff, and to me that indicates that they were getting ready to sign him, or at least like heavily considering signing him. I don't think you would go through a physical with a team if they weren't like pretty far down the road of bringing you in. And during that process, it was discovered that he has Hodgkin's lymphoma, and he's going to have to step away from football as he battles cancer, which is crazy. It's best wishes to him. Obviously, keep him in your thoughts, but like that's just so wild. And hopefully he can get through it.
Yeah, how awful is that? You think obviously you're back home. You look like it seemed like on the precipice of signing a deal with your back with the Saints, a team probably he grew up rooting for. I don't really know.
I mean, must have, yeah.
But man, and then to find out, well, we got some bad news for you, and it's not that we don't want you; it's the fact that we've discovered something, and
I can't imagine how that conversation went.
No, right, exactly.
Like Foster, I hope you're sitting down.
It's like, why? What's wrong?
Right. Yeah, I don't know what he expected to find out in that physical, but I guarantee you it was not that. And so, it's interesting too, because it's like, I think it does show you like, yes, the Saints were like probably going to bring him in. So now they, I don't know what they're going to do at tight end, but they're clearly looking for another tight end option. And hopefully Foster can get back. I think probably the silver lining here is, it's a lot, dealing with cancer is a lot, I don't want to say easier, but more effective if you get to it early. And I think this is the type of situation where, you might, if you didn't have that physical, you might have gone months and months before you were even aware of it. So hopefully that's a situation where they were able to get it early. And, he seems upbeat about it. And hopefully, it's something we're going to keep an eye on. But yeah.
This is something that's now happened second time for the Saints medical staff.
Diagnosing somebody with cancer?
They discovered something with that offensive lineman that did magic that was from, or was he a fullback from the Green Bay Packers?
John Kuhn?
No. He did magic. That's what I vividly remember. And it was even like on America's Got Talent kind of magic level.
How long ago was this?
Oh, I got to look it up now. Josh darn it.
Yeah, I don't know what you're talking about. But yeah, so the one other thing I do want to get into before we move on to the mock drafts, Michael Thomas's deal. It's kind of fascinating when you look at it and you talk about some of the incentives. It's actually, and this was a report from Mike Triplett. He had it first over at New Orleans.football. It's actually not a $10 million guaranteed contract per se. The minimum amount is actually about 6 point something million. And the rest of that to get up to 10 million is tied to availability incentives. And when I say availability, I mean a significant chunk of it is tied to him being on the active game day roster each week. So, I think that's 3.74 million that is kind of divvied up between being on the active game day roster and being on the 53-man roster. So, like, if he's active for all 17 games, he gets all of that money. if he goes on injured reserve, he only gets the 53-man roster bonus, which is much smaller. And so I think it's a good way for the Saints to be like, okay, we're going to guarantee you this money as long as you're here, right? And I think that's a fair way to do it. Like, if you're not available, then you're not going to get all of this money. If you are available, great. We want to pay you. But, I think it's a good way for them to kind of protect themselves a little bit.
Yeah, sorry. I was delving deep into the internet realms, and I found it was actually the guy was from Philadelphia, John Dorenbus, a long snapper. And that was 2017.
Well,
eons ago, I know.
Glad they look for that kind of stuff. But yeah, so Mike Thomas, and so those are the kind of base incentives, and those are the guaranteed incentives of, like, if you show up and you're available, you're going to get this money. Literally nothing beyond that. All he has to do is be available, and this money is his. So that's why it kind of got a little misconstrued as being guaranteed, because I think there's like a category of incentives that are like likely to cash, and those would be in there, so they're effectively guaranteed. Whereas there's another $5 million worth of incentives that are a bit more interesting in terms of whether he can get to them. But what do you think of that deal, Steve, as you kind of look at it?
I think that with Thomas, you're just hoping, obviously, to get. I don't even know what to expect, what kind of production from him, but I think the rework deal is definitely fair for all parties, obviously.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of where you land on it. And so then there's another $5 million of incentives that I find interesting. So he has a receptions incentive. He can earn up to $750,000 in increments of $250,000. So, like, if he gets to 100 catches, that's $250,000. If he gets to 110 catches, it's another $250,000. If he gets to 120 catches, that's another $250,000. So it's going to be interesting if he is available for all 17 games and he gets to that kind of range where, like, oh, you're in week 15 and he has like 96 catches. How much do you pepper him over the final 2 weeks, knowing that, like, oh, 5 catches one way or another could be like $250,000 difference in terms of his paycheck. And I do think it's funny because the Saints have always been a team that is willing to shell that out. Like, if you remember Emmanuel Sanders in the 2020 season, that was the case he was in. He needed like 9 catches to get to his, I can't remember, I think it was a $500,000 catches incentive. And like, they just peppered him with targets the entire game. Like, there was no question what they were doing. And I do appreciate that. Like, if you're going to give someone incentives in their deal and he can get to it, you shouldn't try to screw him out of that money. And the team, like the coaches and the play callers, should definitely not do that. So I'll just go through a couple more of them. Receiving yards as well. It's the same setup where 1,000 yards, he's going to get $250K. If he gets to 1,150, that's another $250. 1,300, that's another $250. So if he maximizes those out, 120 catches, 1,300 yards, he makes an extra $1.5 million in this deal.
Yeah, I mean, we hope that he earns that money, obviously, right?
Right. Right. So there's a few others. Receiving touchdowns, if he gets to 7, that's $250,000. If he makes the Pro Bowl and the team qualifies for the postseason, so it's not or, it's and. Like, if he only makes the Pro Bowl, he doesn't get it. If the team only makes the playoffs, he doesn't get it. If he gets both of those things, that's another $200,000. If he makes the All-Pro first team, that's $500,000. If he is the Offensive Player of the Year, that's $1 million. And here's a funny one. If he's the NFL MVP, he makes $500,000. So the bonus for being Offensive Player of the Year is twice as much as if he wins MVP, which is almost guaranteed not to happen because MVP is always a quarterback.
Yeah, when's the last wide receiver that's won a MVP award?
I don't think there ever has been one. I think I looked this up. Like, I don't think there's ever been a wide receiver winning it that's won MVP. And if you could ever pick one, it would probably have been 2019 when he had 149 catches and was objectively the most valuable player on that roster. And I don't think he even got like votes. I don't think it was even close.
Yeah, I can't recall like Jerry Rice getting an MVP or
think
Randy Moss.
I know a couple running backs have, like Adrian Peterson won it. Like Charles Woodson, I think, won it. No, Charles Woodson won the Heisman. He might have won MVP. I can't remember. But yeah. So okay, a couple more. Super Bowl MVP. That would be another 500K. Super Bowl win plus 110 catches or 1,150 yards, 500K. And that's interesting to me because like they wouldn't just hand him that $500,000 incentive and say, if we win a Super Bowl, we're going to give you $500,000. They're saying, if we win a Super Bowl and you contributed to it significantly, we'll give you money. But they're not just going to be like, if we win a Super Bowl without you, we're not giving you $500,000. And I don't know. Like, I think there was some interesting give and take in these negotiations, I think. And if you're the Saints and he hits these, you're like, great. You were the offensive player of the year. We'll gladly pay you an extra $1 million because you earned it. But also, like, you're not just shelling out money to a guy who you can't necessarily trust based on the injury history. So I do think this was an interesting way to set it up. And, hope it'll be fun to watch and see if he maybe can hit some of these incentives. And if he does, then I think the Saints are in real good shape.
Yeah, into the deep dive of wide receivers and MVP awards. Has never happened. The closest, Jerry Rice in 87, but Elway took it that year.
So if he wins the MVP and not the Offensive Player of the Year, he gets $500,000. If he wins the Offensive Player of the Year and not the MVP, he'll get $1 million. If he wins both, $1.5 million. So 200 catch season incoming.
Yeah, and I guess that shows you right there. It's like you're definitely not getting the MVP. So what was it? You said Offensive Player of the Year is worth more?
Yes. Yeah. The other one is like team gets to the playoffs and makes the Pro Bowl. That's another good example of like, if we make the playoffs without you, we're not paying you $250,000. If we make it and you're also a Pro Bowler, sure. And I think that's an example of one where he was probably like, if we make the play, that was probably a team addition of like, we'll give this to you, but we want to at least guarantee that you had a role in this before we agree to shell out $250,000 because we're like 8 and 9 and a wild card team, right?
When do you think like the next time we get, like we just recently got a medical update from the Pelicans, when are we going to get like a medical update from the Saints on what's going on with Michael Thomas? Because where is he right now? Do we even know in his recovery?
We don't, but I mean, I don't think there's any reason to expect him not to be ready. He got hurt in week 3. He had that surgery about halfway through the season. Like, realistically speaking, if they had made the playoffs, he would have been on the fringe of being able to get back. I'm not saying he ever was looking to get back, but in terms of a timetable, that's where you would have been looking at. Like, if they made a deep run and they were going to the Super Bowl, you might have been in a situation where you could have brought him back. Obviously, they didn't make the playoffs, so it never became a conversation. But you would hope to see him at OTAs. Like, if I'm the Saints, and I get it, you're a star, you don't have to be there. But if I'm the Saints and you have a new quarterback and you want to put the right foot forward, no pun intended, I would want to see him at OTAs because I want him to get as much work with Derek Carr as possible. So that's going to be the first question: is when these OTAs start rolling in, is Mike there? Is he getting work in? And he seems like he's kind of energized with Derek Carr in house. So I think there's a good chance you do see him.
No, I definitely agree with the whole energized bit because we obviously we talked about it immediately when, thank Jesus praying hands came together. It just didn't seem typical Mike Thomas tweets of rap lyrics or anything. It seemed like, holy crap, we finally got a quarterback here.
Yeah, he changed his bio. Say like, yeah, see you next year this time. We'll talk about it. But all right, let's wrap that segment up. It's been going on, and we will come back and get into our mock drafts. This is Inside Black and Gold. Steve's is wrong. Mine's right, as always. Yeah.
The wrongness of mine I can't even delve into, honestly.
It's a bold take. Anyway, keep it locked on Inside Black and Gold. We will be back. I always forget to just have this ready to be clicked. All right, yeah, and if you want to get a breakdown of those incentives, I did put up a post on WWL.com to kind of break that down. So if you want to go check that out, it's got all of these these figures listed. Again, I think I do wonder where you come up with these like 7 receiving touchdowns. Like who decided that was an amount that's worth $250,000? Like 7. Just it seems so random. Like I have a thing of even
I wonder
numbers,
if they
and that's
took like an
weird.
average of an average. I don't know.
You know what it probably is Jawan Johnson led the Saints in receiving touchdowns last year with 6. I think.
No, I think it might have been 7.
Was it 7? Let me see, because I think that's probably
The mark.
where you would have pulled that number from. Of like, okay, what was the was the receiving touchdowns leader last year?
I'm pretty sure it was Jawan with 7.
Yep, it was 7. So that would be my guess. Is like, okay, our leading receiving touchdown getter got 7. So if you can do that this year, you have qualified. That would be my guess. Anyway.
Shoot, Mike had what, 3 the first 3 games.
Well, right, and he's never had a double-digit touchdown season, and I remember tweeting after week 2, I was like, man, he's gonna crush that. and then obviously, I feel like I jinxed him. Anyway.
No, it was just that awful game in Carolina week 3 where Jarvis and Mike got hurt and were never the same the rest of the year.
Yeah, basically ended both of their seasons in that one game. And it probably got PJ Williams cut. Because he's the one who missed the tackle on what's his name? I can't remember his name.
Laviska
Chenault, man.
Oh, that was so gross. Let's
get back into this here. And we're back on Inside Black and Gold mock draft edition. Okay. We felt bad that our first round of mock drafts was so early that we just had to do it again. A lot has changed. There's a new team at the top of the draft. The Saints now have defensive tackles on the roster. And I think our mock drafts reflect that because I don't think there's a single, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure there isn't a single defensive tackle pick in either of our mock drafts for the first 3 rounds, which if you had asked me that 3 weeks ago, I would have been like, what? But I think you have seen them make moves that make you feel a little less crazy at defensive tackle.
Totally agree. I went into, again, this one going, defensive tackle is still a big need for me, but was surprised of how the whole board ended up playing out. And I had a lot of questions, obviously, about the selections ahead of me in round 1, but with the PFF simulator, had no control over what happened and just roll with it, obviously.
Yeah, so we're just going to go through Steve's first, and then we'll get to mine. Both of these, we did it separately, but as and so some of the picks the PFF threw out there are a little different. But yeah, we had the Pro Football Focus simulator kind of give us the order of the first round draft picks, and then we make the Saints pick, and then it continues, make the second round pick and the third round pick. One of these times we'll have to push it out a little farther. But it's just, I'm not going to pretend that I can tell you who the Saints are going to pick in the 5th round of this draft. Like, I don't even know half the names on the board at that point. So it would just be for fun, if anything. But how did you feel this mock? Like, what was your mindset going into this mock draft, Steve?
Right away, again, like I said, I thought defensive tackle was still at the forefront. I want to continue to beef up the D-line. There's still a need there. Running back, to me, wasn't something I thought of at all. I'd be even dreaming of in round 1. But when arguably a top 5 draft talent falls to you that far, I think I couldn't help but pull the trigger on Bijan at that position. But if you go through here, even in the mock draft round 1, I was like, what is Atlanta doing? They went quarterback again early on, and that one threw me off right away. And I was like, all right, we're going to have fun here.
Yeah, so I think the quarterbacks in this are going to be interesting because I've been saying this for a while now. I think CJ Stroud is the top quarterback. I don't know if the Panthers agree with me, but I think if you're trading up to number 1 overall, it's hard. I just can't. You can't sell me on a 5'10" quarterback. You just can't do it, especially at number 1 overall. Like if you were the Texans and you're sitting at number 2 and Stroud goes number 1 and you're like, yeah, okay, Bryce Young, we're going to see what happens. I just like if I made that big trade up, I don't know. I think that the track record of 5'10" quarterback in the NFL isn't great. But either way, Bryce Young goes number 1 here, followed by Stroud of the Texans. And then you have kind of the Jalen Carter question of, does he fall at all based on this off the field stuff? And he also, I don't know if he was distracted or whatever, he didn't really look that great in his workouts and in some of his pro day stuff. So, who knows? Maybe he does drop a little bit in this draft. I don't think you would consider this a drop. I think Tyree Wilson is arguably, if you're going quarterback 1, 2, and 4, which is the case here with Anthony Richardson and the Colts, you're either going at 3 or 5 if you're Jalen Carter. And so 5 is not like a drop to me. But the Seahawks get a steal, in my opinion.
Yeah, top tier. Like, obviously, a guy that could be number 1 overall if everybody wasn't so quarterback crazy. But it just really amazes me. I don't know why the Detroit Lions aren't mentioned more in this QB race for anyone, because I don't know. I've never been a believer in Goff, and it just seems like the Lions and the folks around there seem to be, and I don't get that. I thought for sure they'd want to target something in free agency to at least push Goff even further, and they've done nothing.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. I think Daniel Jeremiah, when I talked to him, he had him taking a quarterback with their 2nd pick.
Okay.
But at that point, it was Anthony Richardson, and I think we've seen people fall in love with Anthony Richardson to a
ridiculously
fault.
Right.
You know what? I wouldn't be surprised to see here if you're the Falcons is you might try to trade up to number 4 if you really want Anthony Richardson, and because you might not feel like he will get past the Seahawks and the Lions and the Raiders, all of whom could draft a quarterback. And if you're the Falcons and Anthony Richardson makes a heck of a lot of sense for Arthur Smith's offense, where he basically treats the quarterback like a running back, who better than that guy? And so I think that's something that I'd be on the lookout for, is the Falcons trying to get up to 4, because if you're the Colts and you're not sold on Anthony Richardson or Will Levis, and you can just get a killing and then move down and get, pieces, and then next year come back in a much more QB heavy draft. I don't know. I don't know if it's much more, but
you think Atlanta be so willing to move on already from Ritter?
He's a 3rd round pick. Yes. If you can, if you feel like one of these guys is your future cornerstone quarterback, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And I mean, you might still start Ritter this year. And hey, if Ritter ends up being the guy, great. You have 2. I think in the position you don't get into the top 10 very often, even when you're bad, right? Like, so if you have a chance to go get a guy, I think you could see it. Either way, we're going to keep going. I know Zach Streif will be happy. Peter Skoronski is ahead of Paris Johnson this time. I know in the last mock draft, he gave you a hard time, and you had to remind him that we didn't actually make these boards.
Yeah, and then he made sure to let me know, too, that PFF sucks.
Yeah, right. And so, yeah, you have Will Levis going to the Falcons, Paris Johnson to the Eagles, Miles Murphy, Devin Witherspoon, Quentin Johnson. This is interesting to me. I don't think there's any way the Patriots pass on Jordan Addison if he's there at 14.
You would think, right? I mean, you keep hearing a lot of whispers now about them maybe going after Odell, also in the running for DeAndre Hopkins. So, yeah, the Pats definitely need wide receiver help for sure.
You got to get somebody. Kalijah Kancey goes. That's pretty early. He goes to the Bucks.
Yeah, that was a
Jackson
name definitely
Smith and
that's
Jigba
been in the Saints range at that 29 pick.
Yeah, I'm surprised to see him go that early. And then Brian Brzee goes at 24. I think he flipped that, but either way, they're off the board before the Saints get to him. Drew Sanders, and then as you kind of spoiled this pick already, Bijan Robinson. So why did you go with Bijan here? I think that's an unlikely decision if the Saints go with a running back, but hey, who knows?
I do too. The fact that this guy that, like I said, could arguably be a top 5 draft board, talent has fallen to you this far, and it's still a position of need, even with the addition of Jamal Williams. I can argue that you still need the influx of new young talent, and you don't know how long the Kamara suspension is going to be, when it's going to come, what's going to happen there with him. But yeah, I to me, as hard as it was, because you see 2 picks later, a guy like Osiris Torrance, where I wanted the interior of the offensive line would be a great need, I would say, and I didn't get anybody. Honestly, I didn't get a D lineman or an offensive lineman in my mock draft, but he was definitely someone that I considered. But the explosiveness and the ability of what Bijan could bring to this Saints offense was just too damn enticing. And I know it was more of a luxury pick than really, you would say, a need or a wise pick at this point. But I just think the talent is way too much to be there at 29 overall.
I just think the way the Saints value running back is just, you would have to be, I mean, like this, if this was like a Saquon Barkley, that's one thing. I just don't see them they feel like they can get running backs in the mid round. Alvin Kamara was a 3rd round pick, right?
Yeah. No, later on in the draft, when I ended up making that
Yeah.
pick too, in my 3rd round, I was like, oh, look at all these running backs that are still here. And I was like, well, you're not going running back again, obviously.
Right. Okay. So your pictures only went out through the 1st round. So I wrote out the rest here. I'll just kind of go through them. Mozzie Smith, that's an interesting one. He went number 37 to the Seahawks. Jahmyr Gibbs went right before the Saints, which is funny because in reality, I think if you get to the 2nd round, Jahmyr Gibbs is on the board, the Saints might take him. But in this mock draft, you already took Bijan Robinson. So there was a 0% chance you are taking Jahmyr Gibbs. And the Panthers apparently wanted Jahmyr Gibbs based on PFF. Who knows? But you went with Josh Downs, a wide receiver out of North Carolina. Why was that?
That's another one where I was like, you know what? I'm going nuts already, taking the running back in round 1. Let's get really kooky. Getting a slot receiver, another toy for Derek Carr in this offense to play with. Love the speed. I know he's undersized, but the explosive abilities, I'm just in fantasy land thinking of how Carr and also like a Pete Carmichael Jr. would be able to take advantage of using him. And like I said, it went off the rails in the 1st round. So I was like, let's really go kooky here. With Mozzie, that was my 1st round pick actually in my mock draft 1.0.
Yeah, but obviously they've changed their roster a little bit since then. So I think that an adjustment makes sense. Dawan Jones is an interesting one. I could see the Saints trying to bring him in. Darnell Washington is a guy I got in the 3rd round of our first mock draft, and I think, justifiably so, his stock has risen based on people got to see him at the combine and were like, "Holy crap!" And so he doesn't get past the Falcons here.
Yeah, that was definitely one where I look back on things and kind of like, ooh, that kind of hurt. I might want to have taken Washington there over Downs.
I don't think you would go tight end in the 2nd round either. I mean, but it's like you look at it and it's just interesting that he's now ahead of Luke Musgrave on this kind of pecking order, which wouldn't have been the case before. There's Kayshon Boutte going to the Cowboys. Guy can't jump. And then we're on to round 3. So we get to number 71. And this one surprised me. The Raiders get Hendon Hooker. And it's like you tilted and we're like, I recognize that name. I'm going with him.
Yeah, I figured looking at the talent pool that was up there that Rick's provided me an outside corner. You can never have too many good cover guys kind of thing. And the only problem is, he really hasn't honestly played that much. Doesn't have that much experience, but I do like the size of the corner. And I think that he has decent speed that would translate into the NFL. But nothing that like this 2.0 mock draft isn't what I'm waving around all proud of. I definitely feel like everything really went askew with getting Bijan in round 1. And even though I was all like chest out proud of it to begin with, but there's just so many other things that I think that need to be addressed. Namely, like I said, that D line is still important. And I didn't get that at all. And I didn't get a guard for this offensive line, which hurt.
Yeah, I think Sam Laporta is going to be an interesting one to watch. I think you could go tight end in the 3rd round, and he's a guy who tested off the charts. Iowa's basically a tight end factory, so that's one that I would keep an eye on going down here. And just to be clear, I don't know if we said it out loud, and so for the actual podcast listeners, Steve took at number 71 Eli Ricks, cornerback out of Alabama, formerly of LSU. And this past season, I think LSU actively tanked his draft stock because he got toasted in that game that the LSU actually beat Alabama. And he looked bad in that game. So, it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think his best game might have been his first game for Alabama this year, honestly.
No, he's got talent. Here's the other one. So I think not taking a running back already, it doesn't really matter. Tajay Spears goes number 97 here. I think this is the first time you see him kind of climb up into the third round of these mocks, but I do think he could very well go in the top 3 rounds. So here's the picks: 29 Bijan Robinson, 40 Josh Downs, 71 Eli Ricks, and that is your 3-round mock draft from Mr. Steve Geller. How do you feel about it?
I thought that the PFF grades were a lot better than I thought I had on it. I would obviously love to see a guy like Bijan in the Saints offense, but don't think that's realistic and don't feel like he would be around that late. It would, if that were the case, shoot, the Saints might be able to get a nice little haul back in some draft picks and move down just a little bit more. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. All right. So mine looks a little different than yours, but it'll still work. So it stayed the same at the top: Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Tyree Wilson, Anthony Richardson. But where it changed in the mock draft for me is you can see Christian Gonzalez to the Seahawks, cornerback out of Oregon at number 5. In your mock draft, it was Jalen Carter. As you can see, in this mock draft, he fell. So you got Will Anderson at number 6 to the Lions, Peter Skoronski at number 7, and Zach Strief's going to be thrilled. Will Levis to the Falcons again. So, that's a popular, trendy pick, is Will Levis to the Falcons at number 8. Then Paris Johnson at number 9. And then the Eagles, with the Saints pick at number 10, take Jalen Carter. That would be hard to stomach if you're as someone who knows where they got that pick, that they end up getting the player I would argue was the best player in this draft at number 10. A guy who could, if there was a team at the top that didn't need a quarterback, Jalen Carter could be number 1. And they're getting him at number 10 because of the off the field circumstances. So the rich get richer in that respect. But what do you think about that? I know you're the resident Eagles fan.
I was just amused that he's actually tumbled that far, even in a mock simulator kind of deal.
Yeah, I agree, and I still feel like it's hard for me to believe he gets by the Falcons. With the Georgia connection, they're gonna,
Ryan Nielsen, right?
But if they love Will Levis, they love Will Levis, and so that's the only way I think he gets past the Falcons is if they do take a quarterback.
I didn't even realize that both our mocks have the Falcons taking Levis.
Yeah, yeah, it's a trendy pick. This one's interesting to me too. Is Jackson Smith and Jigba goes to the Texans at number 12, and it seems early, and it's definitely early. But the thing to remember is in this mock, the Texans also ended up with CJ Stroud. And I think that it's an interesting pick because, you look at what Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase were able to do, kind of bringing that college connection to the pro level and how quickly they were able to thrive. And it's because they had that comfort already coming in. And I think this is an interesting, I think you're going to see some more teams try that when they do take a quarterback and his wide receiver is right there. Why not? If you're going to go after a wide receiver, go after him at 12. And that's an interesting one. I think it's going to throw off the scale of the receivers if that does happen.
No, I agree. It makes total sense because you talk about that relationship, being able to complete each other's sentences kind of thing, that being on the same page. And if you have that rapport that was so great too, that you want to continue to work with somebody in the NFL, they can just take it to a new level. Obviously, what Burrow's been able to do with Chase has that been ridiculous.
Yeah. I don't think it's surprising what they were able to do together. It's surprising how quickly they were able to do it. And it's because they had 3 years in college where they basically already knew exactly what each other was going to do. And you just bring that to the NFL and it's another step. They also happen to be extremely prolific in college, which, it's not like you're bringing in a guy who like you're bringing in Derek Carr, Foster Moreau. And it's like, oh yeah, well, how much can you expect? It's like, okay, Jamar Chase had 20 touchdowns this junior season at LSU. Or sophomore season rather. I think these 5 picks are interesting to me. You start at 19 with the Bucks and they go with Bijan Robinson, and I could see that happening. They moved on from Leonard Fournette. They signed who did they sign? Chase Edmonds. They signed Chase Edmonds. Not exactly a guy you're worried about. They have Keyshawn Vaughn. I think that they could easily end up with Bijan here. The only issue with that pick is I don't think the Bucks are ready to win right now. But if you're going for that 1-year tank and you're hoping to come out with Caleb Williams next year, and you can also give him Bijan Robinson, a guy who's probably not going to tilt you toward wins as a rookie the way that some other guys might, I could see it happening. Anyway, next pick, Brian Brzee, a guy who I think if he gets to the Saints, you have to take. Kalijah Cansey goes at number 22 to the Ravens, and then Jordan Addison goes at number 23. These are two premier defensive tackles that you don't have a chance at. And that,
right.
And I think changes the equation for the Saints a little bit.
Yeah, I was really surprised how mine ended up falling too, where none of those big D linemen, those interior dudes were around for me. And it did throw me off.
Yeah. So first tight end off the board here, Dalton Kincaid to the Cowboys at 26. I think that's a reasonable pick. They moved on from Dalton Schultz, and they need somebody in there. I could see it being him.
You got to
if you look at number
one Dalton with another.
Yes. And if you look at number 28, Josh Downs goes to the Bengals. So if you were wondering whether you got good value in your pick in the second round, there's some people out there who think Josh Downs could be a first round pick. So I didn't have a chance at him. So look at it that way. But the guy I did have a chance at, and the guy I was very tempted to take in my last mock draft, but I took Anthony Richardson because he fell to me. The only other person I considered here was Mozzie Smith, but I don't think defensive tackle is as much of a need now that I'm going to overvalue that position in my grades the way that I would prior to signing Colin Saunders and prior to signing Nathan Shepard and prior to signing Malcolm Roach back on a new deal. So I'm going Osiris Torrance. I think he's the best player available. He's the top interior offensive lineman in this draft. And you now have premium depth behind either Cesar Ruiz or Andres Pete. You cannot go into a season expecting Andres Pete to be healthy. I think you're going to keep him around. But now if and when he goes down, you have a top tier guard who you're projecting as the kind of the starter of the future. And so when you're without Andres Pete, you might honestly be getting an upgrade for that period of time when you put him in there. So I think it's a no-brainer if this is the way the draft board goes and you end up with Osiris Torrance and you feel good about it. That said, fans will go ballistic if the Saints take another interior lineman in the first round. And I'm just going to tell you, you're wrong, because this would be a great pick for them.
Yeah, definitely known as one of those, another road grader for the big boys up front, which is a definite need for the team. And, the best part about this, Jeff, is the fact that, we go through these. I like to see, what ends up in that pool of picks for me, what kind of, guys are around when you're picking too, because you start to see a few names that are consistently picking up in that range where you get that, I guess you call it the cone of picks, the cone of talent you're looking at that could end up filling in some kind of need at pick number 29. Because I think that you can get sort of, hone in that dartboard pick with your first round selection. But yeah, doing anything longer, we're really having shots in the dark in these later rounds, obviously, the next couple rounds. But a first round pick, even at pick number 29, you kind of get an idea of really what could be there.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can project the second round pretty well. But yeah, once you get to the third round, it's all guess. So you have Michael Mayer coming off the first pick of the second round here, tight end out of Notre Dame. I like that pick for the Steelers. Drew Sanders, linebacker, goes to the Cardinals at 34. These are interesting picks. The Raiders pick up Jahmyr Gibbs, running back out of Alabama. So they would be effectively pairing two Alabama running backs with Josh Jacobs and Jahmyr Gibbs. They have Josh Jacobs on a franchise tag. So, maybe this is like hey, they're bringing in this guy, and it spells like, okay, we can move on from Josh next season. Either way, that's an interesting pick to me. Darnell Washington goes at 39. So even if I wanted Darnell Washington again, I could not get him. And I'm not taking him in the first round. And to be honest, I wasn't going to take him in the second round. I liked him in the third round. I don't like him in the second round. I think there's too many tight ends on the board to take a tight end in the second round. But this is kind of a pick out of left field for me. But there's a reason I made all of these picks, or at least there is a subplot that I'm gonna mention at the end. And so I went with Isaiah Foskey, the edge rusher out of Notre Dame. And I know the defensive interior is something I've talked a lot about, but I also think you need to get more athletic at the edge rusher position. And you have a new defensive line coach. I think he's going to want to bring in his guys. And I think this is just a high caliber pick. He's a team leader. He was at the Senior Bowl. He's very athletic. He can kind of, who knows how much longer Cam has in him. And so this is a guy who you can kind of put in a rotation. And I don't know what your expectations are with Peyton Turner, but this is going to push him at the very least. And I like the pick at 40. I like a guy like Foskey, and I think you can never have too many edge rushers, in my opinion.
No, you need somebody definitely to push Peyton Turner. So I like that move there for sure, just because injuries are one thing, Jeff, but when we're seeing healthy scratches during the season, that's going to make me be a lot more concerned about his development. I'm not writing him off yet, but this is definitely a huge season for Peyton Turner. And yeah, I love the idea of bringing in another body to challenge him there. I felt like Davenport was that dude, but he's not around anymore. A person like Foskey, though, like you mentioned too, with Cam Jordan's not getting any younger either, so beefing up that D-line, still huge, still important, obviously.
Yeah, and if you need to get any information on Isaiah, Brian Kelly's right up the road. He obviously coached him in college, so I think that is a mine of information that you could get to pretty easily. And I like the pick personally. As I should. I made it. Jalen Hyatt, wide receiver at Tennessee. B.J. Ojulari was one who I was considering. He ended up going 43 to the Jets, obviously edge rusher at LSU. But I think he's more of an outside linebacker than a defensive end. I don't think he has the bulk. And I was watching him at the Senior Bowl, and like he was getting around people. Like he's got speed rushes, but he was kind of getting bullied. I don't think he's big enough to be a traditional 4-3 defensive end. And I think that's the one difference when I was trying to make a decision between BJ and Isaiah is I think Isaiah has the size and strength necessary, and I'm not sure BJ has it. But I mean, like in a 3-4, I think he could eat. And, that's just kind of when you go through a draft, it's not always about who the best player is. It's about who is the best player that fits what you're trying to do. And I think that's a good difference there in terms of like who might take BJ versus who might take Isaiah. Moving on, Dawan Jones, interesting pick again. It's another draft where Luke Musgrave went after Darnell Washington, so I think that tier has been reset. Sam Laporta, so a lot of tight ends going in the second round. Let's see, going down, Derek Hall at number 61. I've seen him be a popular pick. And then the Eagles get Siaki Ika at 62. And when I passed on defensive tackle in the second round, I was kind of hoping that Ika might drop to me in the third round because I do want him, but my grade's not high enough to take him over a guy like Isaiah. So, I think this is a frustration for me here. And so I think it kind of sent me tilting a little bit in terms of what my next pick is because I just don't see another interior defensive lineman on the board that I like in the third round.
Who knows? Anyway. You'd be on the phone with the Bears trying to jump ahead of the Eagles then to try and get him.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that happening, right? Like if you're the Saints and you really want this guy and he's kind of the last defensive tackle on that tier,
yeah,
I could see them trying to move up in the third round, and I would advocate for it. I think that's where you want to see trades. Moving up in the first round is tough. It's so expensive, and you have to nail it. Whereas in the third round, it's not going to cost as much, and it's really just a way to make sure you're not guessing. And so I could see that happening. I think that's a good point. Going to the third round, Zach Charbonnet. So the running backs are starting to come off. That's number 67 of the Broncos. And so I get to a guy that I really, really like a lot. I don't know if the Saints are going to go this route, but if they do, this is a pick I would love for them to make. It is Nathaniel Dell. His nickname is Tank. So you can go Tank Dell, number 71, wide receiver out of Houston. I watched him at the Senior Bowl a lot. And he was just not being guarded by anybody. And when I say that, I mean, people were trying to guard him. They were not able to do it. Like he was just getting crazy separation. He's just, he's not. He reminds me a little bit of Amon-Ra St. Brown, another guy I really liked coming out of USC, where he's not physically imposing. He's not the greatest athlete in the world. He's not the fastest guy, but he just understands how to get open, understands how to use his body and make catches. And I think if you were able to do this and you bring him in and you have a premier slot receiver, you have Chris Olave, you have Rashid Shaheed, and then, you see what you get out of Mike Thomas. And if you get a all-pro type season out of Mike Thomas, fantastic. That's a win for you. It's a good problem to have. If you don't, and you have to move on from Mike Thomas this year, you go forward feeling very, very good about your wide receiver depth. And so that's why I could see them going wide receiver here.
Yeah, I definitely think the team will address wide receiver in the draft. It's more of a need, I think, than folks might think. Just because you address the position in round 1 last year doesn't mean you're done building, I think, especially when there are still questions. Obviously, great, Michael Thomas is back, but there is still questions of, obviously, what does he contribute? What is he able to contribute? What is he healthy enough to contribute, kind of thing. So I definitely still see wide receiver as a need in this draft, because what they had in guys, we've seen what, your Marquez Callaways have done, kind of thing. And adding more young upper tier guys that you get in the second or third round kind of deal is more important, I think, for building depth on this roster for the long haul.
Sorry, I have 2 cats fighting in the corner of the room. No, I agree with a lot of that. So if you keep going, Eli Ricks goes at 74. So if you were wondering what your value was like with that 3rd round pick in your mock draft, he goes only a few picks later in this mock draft. So, you weren't reaching per se. It's really just a question of whether the Saints would add another cornerback, which feels like too much of a luxury at this point, because considering you did it last year in the 2nd round.
Yeah, like I said, my whole thing went cuckoo bananas after that 1st round. And when I'm seeing those running back names pop up in the 3rd round, even of there you go, boom, A-Chain. That's another dude. Great value here in the 3rd round. And I spent, obviously, you see that spending a 1st round pick on a running back in round 1 on a Bijan, where there's no denying the talent there, but it's like there's so many, you can get so much better value later down the line, kind of thing.
I agree. And so this is an interesting round, in my opinion, in terms of the quarterback. So you were asking about the Lions. They didn't go for a quarterback in the 1st round, but they end up bringing in Hendon Hooker here. And I could see that being something they go. I think someone's going to draft Hendon Hooker in the 3rd round. And he's going to be a guy that you try to develop. And so that would make sense. If you do want, you are comfortable with Jared Goff, you do like Jared Goff, you can bring in a Hendon Hooker and have him sit on the bench and learn. And maybe 2-3 years from now, when you're ready to move on from Jared Goff, he's ready. So I think that's a good pick. The other interesting one, the next pick, number 82, the Bucs go with Tanner McKee.
Man.
And this would be kind of fascinating, because he would go into a room with Kyle Trask and Baker Mayfield, and any of them could start. But the Bucs might also pick the worst option just because they want to lose. So I don't know.
Yeah, I don't understand a lot of their signings and what direction they think they're going right now.
Nope. Well, I think they're going down. I think they think they're going down, and they should be. Okay, Jacqueline Roy, the LSU guy, goes to the Dolphins at number 84, defensive tackle. Jordan Battle, safety out of Alabama, another guy I liked, is gone. This is one that threw me for a loop. And number 89, the Giants take Trey Palmer. And I like Trey Palmer. I was watching him, another guy at the Senior Bowl who I was watching, and he's as fast as they come. Doesn't have great hands, but and I was like, man, maybe the Saints can grab him as a UDFA. And for some reason, he's now flying up to the 3rd round, which, as someone who watches the Giants, I think it's they do like LSU receivers, and he is a former LSU receiver. He obviously is listed on here as Nebraska, but that was only his last season where he caught, I think, 70 passes, 1,000 yards. And so maybe that's what this is. The Giants have a tendency to go after LSU wide receivers, and that's what it is. But that surprised me a lot to even see him in the 3rd round at all.
No, definitely a name. I always remember, Coach O, for whatever, saying Trey Palmer.
Trey Palmer. Yeah, he's got the wheels. Faster than I don't know, what's the Cajun term for
June bug or something. I don't know.
Faster than a June bug. Anyway, all right. Luke Schoonmaker, tight end out of Michigan. He's interesting to me. Panthers get him at 93. Very athletic. Surprisingly athletic for a guy named Schoonmaker. Just sounds like a slow name. But him and Sam Laporta, I think, are very interesting. The Eagles grabbed Dorian Williams at 94. Kid at linebacker at Tulane, who I really like.
That's surprising to see him that high, huh?
No, I think third round is good for him. I think that's about where you would see him go. Maybe fourth round, but no, he impressed a lot of people, I think, in the combine, and he ran a 4.5 40, which it's pretty good. And then here you go. Just like in your draft, the comp picks show up, and the 49ers end up with Tajay Spears. I think this is kind of like the 49ers take a running back in the third or fourth round every year, sometimes in both. They just do it. Last year it was Ty Davis Price. The year before that, they took Trey Sermon and Eli Mitchell, and then Trey Sermon, who they took in the third round, they cut. Like, it's just for whatever reason. It's like they have this like quota that they have to take a shot at a running back every year. And in this draft, it's Tajay Spears. And that's a bummer to me because you see it getting to pick 100 and you're like, man, if,
right.
Saints might be able to nab him in the fourth round, but he is not available. And so that's the end of my mock draft. As you can see, number 29, Osiris Torrance. Number 40, Isaiah Foskey, edge rusher out of Notre Dame. Number 71, Nathaniel Tank Dell, wide receiver out of Houston. And I see I was tempted to take Mozzie Smith at number 29. I was tempted to take BJ Ojulari or Luke Musgrave, the tight end out of Oregon State, at number 40. And I was tempted to take Hendon Hooker in the third round. I passed on him. And then Chris Smith out of Georgia is still a guy I like. I've liked him the entire time. But
Ojulari was a Senior Bowl guy too, or no?
Yes. And if you hadn't noticed, that is the main difference, right? So in the first mock draft, I ended up taking Anthony Richardson, Siaki Ika, and Darnell Washington. None of those guys were at the Senior Bowl. And at the time, I was like, man, I'm going to get all these wrong because the Saints just love Senior Bowl guys. Like every free agent they're bringing in, Lonnie Johnson, Johnathan Abram, both Senior Bowl guys, Nathaniel Shepard, Colin Saunders, both Senior Bowl guys. Like every pass rusher on the Saints right now went to the Senior Bowl. Like it's not a coincidence. That's
not at all, right?
They value it highly. And so this time around, I went with all three Senior Bowl guys. Osiris Torrance, Isaiah Foskey, and Tank Dell, all at the Senior Bowl.
Oh man, you are like the Senior Bowl special.
Yep.
I can't even say that's not a bad thing to be.
Not if you want to get them right.
Right.
If like you could make an argument that those are not the best picks and they could have picked better people, but if you want to get the picks right,
you're taking dudes from the Senior Bowl.
Yeah, I mean, you better have at least one in there.
I was going to say the likelihood at least one of those three they're taking.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's the end of my mock draft. So if you remember, so obviously I had Osiris Torrance, guard out of Florida, Isaiah Foskey, edge rusher at Notre Dame, Tank Dell, wide receiver at Houston. Steve took Bijan Robinson, the running back out of Texas, Josh Downs, the wide receiver out of North Carolina, and Eli Ricks, the cornerback out of Alabama. I like my picks better.
Yeah, I like I said, mine was so funky and weird. I was tempted to redo it, and then I was like, you know what? Just stick with it.
Yeah, I mean, like the way I look at mock drafts, it's like, I joke about being right, but it's like I think it's less about being right and more just kind of like going down like rabbit holes of like,
yeah, exactly.
Who's on the board right now? Who would I take and why? Like that's why I like doing the different boards between yours and mine, because like we're making different decisions. Every time the board comes up, it's a little different. And you might like, if Anthony Richardson is there at 29, I might still take him. I get that you signed Derek Carr, but it's too much of a value. He might not like it, but this is my mock draft, not Derek's. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, he just came from a situation, obviously, where it was all talked about wanting to feel loved and wanted and everything. And that'd be kind of shitty if you come in and right away, first round of the draft, Saints are taking a quarterback. That'd be pretty rough.
Beat him.
Right.
Don't let him be better than you. Anyway, that's it. That's the second mock draft. We'll definitely do at least one more before the draft comes around. But I think that we've adjusted a good bit in terms of who's been brought in, and these are the answers to today's trivia question.
Yeah, and overall, in general, in free agency, you got to be impressed with what the Saints have been able to do. Everybody was all worried about, once again, another season of being in cap hell, and now you look at their salary cap numbers, and I believe they're got the most top 5 or at least top 10 in amount of space they have to sign people right now.
I'm sorry. Was that a question? I was looking at the.
I just know the Saints, obviously all after worrying about their salary cap room, suddenly now where we stand, they're thinking they're in the top 5 or at least top 10 of salary cap available space.
Yeah, they're in the middle of the pack. And I mean, like, I don't think anyone locally was super concerned about their ability to create cap space. Like, we all knew what was going to happen, and we're there again. I do think that, like, there's this idea that they have 14 million, they have to spend 14 million. I don't think they do. Like, they do have to sign their draft class,
right?
But like, if you have money against the cap available to you, then you get that next year. Like, it's credited to you toward next season. So like, it wouldn't be the end of the world if they just, I think you do want to have some money in reserve. So if someone goes down in training camp and all of a sudden you have to go sign somebody, you have it. Right. So I wouldn't be surprised if they're done making moves, at least like significant moves. But all right. But let's wrap this up. We've been on here forever, and we still want to do a mailbag. So let's wrap that segment up. Those were our mock drafts. Hopefully you have already torn them apart, because they will both be wrong. And we're going to come back and hit the mailbag, a real quick one, since we're already almost 90 minutes into this thing. And so get your questions and comments in there, and we will be right back. And we're back on Inside Black and Gold. I have gone deep into the mailbag and found all of your, people have been really nice to us today. I don't know why. We need to find more trolls so I can get mad. Good. Happy podcasts aren't fun podcasts. Come on.
I think it's a lovely day out, and people are in a good mood of what's been going on lately with the Black and Gold. So maybe all the trolls are in hiding.
We even have JD1 here. He says, I'm a Raiders spy, and he's not even saying anything mean. Like, why are you here?
He's just like, hey, guys, I'm spying out. No big deal.
And if you're telling me you're a spy, you're not really doing a good spy job. The spy craft there is weak. Anyway, so Saint for Life says, the oil has to be addressed. The last 2 years have been a disaster. Guard needs to be looked at. I mean, like, I don't necessarily, like, you look at the people, you look at the players on the roster, and you have a first-round pick at right tackle. You have a second-round pick, which was your first pick of that draft at center. You have a first-round pick at right guard. You have a first-round pick at left guard. And you have a first-round pick at left tackle in Trevor Penning. And you just didn't see him on the field because he got hurt. Andres Pete, you just don't see enough on the field because he gets hurt. Cesar Ruiz, I thought, played really well. Eric McCoy has been very consistent. And Ryan Ramczyk, while I don't think he had his best season, was consistent. So, I think you have the pieces there. What you don't have is the depth. And that's why I agree with you. That's why I went with Osiris Torrance at number 29, because I am tired. I like Calvin Throckmorton. They brought him back. He's a quality depth player. Storm Norton seems great, but I don't want to see them starting. I really don't. And you need to have someone backing these players up that you can put on the field and not get annihilated every time you try to drop back to pass. So I agree with you. I think guard is something you do have to like. I think when you're talking about needs versus wants, I think a quality young guard is among the needs.
Yeah, you mentioned obviously health being an issue. It's like, when's the starting 5 offensive line together? What's been more together, Jeff? The starting offensive line for the Saints or the starting 5 for the Pelicans?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a good question.
I don't know. It's just
why are you trying to bring me down, man? I don't want to talk about the Pelicans.
No, I'm just saying with the offensive line was a frustrating thing. Obviously, guys not being able to stay on the field. And yeah, you say the next man up mentality, and the guys behind your starters are obviously not as good. And that got tested, I feel, a lot more often, a lot more than anybody would have liked last year. But I feel like that seems to be always the case with the O-line, man. Those guys, are just
get hurt.
Yeah, it's a rough position.
Like we can get mad at Teron Armstead and say he's injury prone. We can get mad at Andres Pete and say he's injury prone. They are, but that's part of the reason you moved on from Teron. And it's like, but that's just what happens. I mean, offensive linemen get hurt, and it's like it's hard to prevent it because a lot of times you're talking about injuries where they're getting backed up, and then someone just rolls up onto their leg, and it's like, what do you do, right? Trevor Penning was blocking on a run play, and all of a sudden his foot just blew up on him, and just like you can't. There's only so much you can do, right? But yeah, it is frustrating. And during the 2021 season, you played half the season without either starting tackle. Tough to win games that way. So you need not only starting caliber players, you need replacement level depth. And right now they don't have replacement level depth. I agree with this take. Is like they do need to do something.
There's even still questions, obviously, at tackle, just because what's going on with Trevor Penning? We hopefully he comes back from another, foot injury and that he's going to need surgery on.
I mean, I don't think there's any questions as to whether he'll be the starter. I think it's just
it's unfortunate though that all you know already of him is more injury than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, I think he played well when he was in there, so I think that gives you some positive momentum. Where last year you just weren't sure what to expect, and so you were working in behind James Hurst. And I think this year, assuming you keep James Hurst on the roster, I think the goal will be for Trevor to start.
You mentioned Hurst. I think it might sound crazy or whatever, but I definitely think he's one of those unsung heroes from last season. Like, he really gave you a lot of valuable snaps when you really had nothing going on there because of, Penning being banged up.
See, I put him in the same category as Calvin Throckmorton, where you can't get mad at him because the expectations are so much lower than they would be for a Trevor Penning. And I don't think I think he played well relative to his expectations, but the expectations were not very high. And you need to have a higher ceiling there. And I think especially in the run game, he didn't do enough.
Oh yeah.
And that's somewhere where I think you can get really a lot more nasty with Trevor out there. So, I said, I think you've invested the draft capital. You just got to see it on the field. Here's Louise Lockett says, hopefully we don't have to do those depressing shows after demoralizing Saints losses anymore. And I'm still going to be doing depressing shows either way. I'm a depressing kind of guy.
No, we're going to be in, all high spirits after that week 1 victory over Andy Dalton and the Panthers.
Right. Austin Klaska says, I'm excited about Johnathan Abram. Great box safety, but makes too many mental errors. However, he won't be on the field for us a lot, so he should be in a position to succeed. And yeah, I think that's why, if they were signing Johnathan Abram to be the starting strong or free safety, then I would feel differently about the signing. In this case, you are bringing in a talented player who has warts, but you are only going to use him in situations where it benefits you. You don't have to put him in positions where he might struggle, because you do have Marcus May and Tyrann Mathieu, assuming they're both healthy and out there. So, like, I think it's just a position of strength now where, yeah, you do have a very good tackler in Johnathan Abram. You do have a guy who can get downhill, and you can maybe use in pass rushing nickel sets, right? Dime sets. You can have cover a tight end across the middle of the field. It's not an assignment a lot of cornerbacks and safeties want to take on. And so you do have a guy who can do it. And so I think it's a quality signing. Again, if he was the starter, it would be a different story. But in the role they're going to have him in, I agree, Austin. I think it's a good addition.
Right there with you too about he's not our starter, but a great piece that you can rely on in a rotational situation.
Rotational. All right. and I agree with this too, is he definitely does have a type. Dennis Allen does have a type, and it's very much players who can play multiple positions. They call it being multiple. And like, one of the main reasons you wanted to pair Marcus May and Tyrann Mathieu is because either of them can play either position. And I still struggle to see that vision, because I don't think Marcus May is a good enough deep safety. I don't think he can cover well enough to truly be multiple, but that's still the idea. And that's why you bring in guys like Lonnie Johnson and Johnathan Abram. Here's one other question. The Saints have a good amount of cap space left. If you were in Mickey Loomis's shoes, who would be someone you'd be looking to sign? I did see on Twitter that the Saints re-signed Isaac Yiadom, just another kind of special teams depth guy. I don't know. Like, I don't think there's a ton that you're trying to do here in terms of, like, you might bring in someone late, you might bring in someone after the draft, but I'm not falling over myself trying to sign another free agent right now.
Yeah, there's nothing that, at least that I can think of off the top of my head, name-wise, position. I'm still looking, though, at that D-line, whether, come the draft for sure, and definitely in free agency, I'm still, pedaling around there. It'll be interesting. We haven't seen anything happen with Kentavious Street, Jeff, but I think we both fully expect maybe when things even settle down more that he kind of takes that 1-year veteran deal with, Ryan Nielsen in Atlanta kind of deal.
Yeah, but I mean, the longer it goes on, the longer you imagine he could potentially come back. Like, I think
Sure.
he did like it here.
Right.
So we'll see. But moving on, Smoke says he hopes the Saints get on Hard Knocks. It's possible now that Dennis Allen is the head coach, but I still I think it's highly unlikely that the Saints ever approve of going on Hard Knocks.
Well, I saw the 1-2 for this year. One of the teams in the running are the New York Jets, and they're going to want that clown show on TV with Brett Favre when Aaron Rodgers, when that deal out gets done. I know, I can't believe I did it again.
You've done it so many times.
They are one now. They are the same to me.
They are the same. Austin says he would have picked Darnell Washington in the second round. I can't co-sign drafting a tight end in the second round. It's really difficult for me in terms of the impact they're going to have, and the value you can get later. It just does not make sense to me. But I like Darnell Washington. Like, if he gets them in the third round, no brainer to me. I just think the names on the board at 40 are going to be way too good to settle for a tight end. That when you just paid Juwan Johnson and you feel comfortable with Adam Troutman as your blocking tight end.
I will say, though, with them bringing in Foster Moreau, and obviously unfortunate news for him, but it clearly a sign that this team is still looking for some kind of upgrade at the tight end position.
No, I mean, I don't think it's an upgrade. I think you're bringing
another body. Yeah,
I mean, like last year, this time last year they had Nick Vannett, right? Like, I think that's the type of body you're trying to bring in, because you just, it's two tight end. Like, you need players to go through drills, right? Like, it's tough to make it with that number of bodies. Like, I think you do need one more.
Hopefully the ridiculousness of even trying to call Taysom Hill a tight end at least ends.
Yeah, I don't think. I mean, they might still list him at that position. And in terms of fantasy football, I hope they do. But yeah, I mean, he's not a guy you're really dealing with a tight end. Don Tomasino says Kincaid reminds me of Shockey, Jeremy Shockey. And I don't know if you're talking about the Saints version of Jeremy Shockey or the Giants version of Jeremy Shockey. I could see it. Jeremy Shockey is fascinating when you go look back. I remember vividly, he's the reason that the NFL made it so when someone's like helmet pops off, you have to stop. Like if the ball carrier loses his helmet, the play's dead. Because I remember he would constantly have his helmet fly off. Like it happened at least 3 or 4 times when he had the ball and he wouldn't stop. He would just keep trying to plow into people with no helmet on. It was like he could die. I mean, he was a crazy person. And I don't know if Dalton Kincaid has that type of mean streak in him, but we'll never know because you can't do that anymore. He ruined it.
No, you mentioned that's definitely funny. That I definitely think of Shockey running around like, with no helmet on and not even a care in the world that he could get like completely just
dead. He could die. Like if no one was wearing helmets, that's one thing. Everyone else is. Don Tomasino also says they should draft BJ and use him like Hayden Ellis. I mean, if you're gonna, I get it. I understand what you're trying to say here, but like you are a 3-4. You're not a 3-4 team. You're a 4-3 team. And Caden Ellis was a Sam linebacker who played well and got up the field, but you're not going to draft BJ, who was a pass rusher by trade, and say now you're an inside linebacker. No, like he's an outside linebacker, I think, and he could be a really good one. But the Saints aren't going to draft him because they don't use outside linebackers. It's not their defense. Now that could change, but I highly doubt it. Anyway,
that's a guy that we'll definitely be curious to see how Ellis fits in his new surroundings this year because, man, that was just a big time black and gold developmental piece that you feel is just starting to hit his stride. And unfortunately, now that's going to be in Atlanta.
See, I do disagree with that slightly. And it's because he's 27 years old. It's not like you lost a 23-year-old that you drafted 4 years ago and he's like just blossoming before your eyes. Like if you weren't going to start him this year or next year, are you going to wait until, are you going to sit there and then all of a sudden you have a 30-year-old linebacker who's starting for the first, like that's the issue to me. If he was 23, I think you could have probably justified a bigger contract for him. Being 27 and not having a route to a starting job is tough. So I don't have an issue with it. Like if they could have kept him on a very, very reasonable deal, that's one thing. I don't have any qualms about losing him for the deal he left on because you were never going to give him that.
The deal, I totally agree with you. I guess the big stinger is the fact that it's Atlanta.
Oh, yeah, sure. Right. But that, like the second you lost Ryan Nielsen to Atlanta, you knew this was going to happen. We've talked about it extensively.
Right.
Like we've talked about it so many times on this podcast that I'm glad it did happen so that I can say we were right.
Told you so.
It was, there's like an inevitability. Here's Mario. He points out, so we talked about Foster Moreau and he got diagnosed with cancer. I think he's referring to Nick Fairley here. He had a heart thing, I want to say. And that obviously affected him. I don't remember, like that was before I got here, I think, in 2016. I think it was not that long before that, but I don't remember the details on it.
Yeah, I definitely remember it was an unfortunate medical issue for him. And he was someone that brought a lot of that fire to the D-line, man. And unfortunately, his career got cut way too short.
Austin is a fan of my Nathaniel Dell pick. And I think everyone will be a fan of that pick if it's made once they see him on the field because he is a fun guy to watch. And I think like he's just, when you go to Houston and you're in the American Athletic Conference and you tend to get overlooked. And I think he's every bit of legit. But all right, those are all the ones that had stars next to, but let's see. There's going to be a few more here. Mastermind says, do we select a defensive lineman or best available for pick number 29? Well, as you saw, neither one of us took a defensive lineman at number 29 in our mock drafts. I think if you feel comfortable, you were able to bring in 2 quality defensive tackles that it just kind of gives you the luxury of being able to say, if there's a player here that we really like, we are not going to draft a defensive tackle just because we're desperate for defensive tackles. And I think that's where you want to be when you're in the draft. You never want to be in a situation where there's someone you really like and you want to draft him, but you're like, man, we just have to fill a hole here. We don't have a choice. It's just like that's not the way good teams draft. And so, like, again, I went with Osiris Torrance, and I feel really good about that pick. Steve went with Bijan Robinson, and it's like, okay, you're drafting at the top of those positions. And I always have advocated for, like, if you're kind of mixed in terms of where you're valuing one position or another, I've always felt like if you have an opportunity to take the top graded player at a position. So if you're talking about running back, if you're talking about guard, are you getting the best guard in the draft? Because if so, I value that a little higher than, am I getting the 5th best edge rusher? Am I getting the 7th best quarterback? Right. And that's why, like, I don't think they're going to take Bijan Robinson, but I think the logic makes sense if you do at that point in the draft, because you're still getting the number 1 running back on the board.
Yeah, like I said, it was one of those, it was hard to pull the trigger, but in the end, I felt that for the reason, I feel like just because he's a running back, he's not a top 10 pick, top 5 pick shoot. And for the number 29 overall, in a position where you're looking to get younger, get more dynamic, think it's someone that just could add a lot of value to the offense, even though there are so many running backs that are available in this draft. I feel like that's a fact. Actually, there are so many running backs that you look at tight end and running back. I feel like it's just chock full those early rounds of guys you can grab.
Yeah, as Danny T04 says, are the Saints going to pick up Ruiz's 5th-year option? I mean, you're bringing him back on a new deal one way or the other. The question is just how you're doing it. So, it's expensive. Like, you're not getting a great discount with that 5th-year option if you pick it up, but you can restructure it. That's what they did with Marshawn Lattimore when they picked his up, is they signed him to the 5th-year option, and then they restructured that. And the Saints love to restructure deals, so I could see them doing it. I could also see them just trying to hammer out an extension with him off the 4th year if it makes more financial sense. But one way or another, you're bringing him back, because I think he really stood out last year, and I think you're feeling very comfortable with him this time around, as opposed to going into year 3 where he had a lot to prove.
Yeah, it was definitely one of those positive years for Ruiz. I know a lot of folks were big time down on him, man, to start the year. And we kind of, I think, laughed about it. It's like, yeah, it's funny what happens when you're brought in during a COVID lacking season, when it came to workouts and how much time you got to spend with the team, and now getting a full training camp and full taste of getting acclimated to life in the NFL. You started to see a different Ruiz. And yeah, I would expect, obviously, even another step this year.
Okay, so this is one more, and then I think that we can wrap it up. Danny T04. And I think, and I like this comment because I think it's interesting, and I think it's actually backwards. It says, Saints are drafting defense in the 1st round. Come on, man. This is DA. Laughing, crying emoji, laughing, crying emoji. And I understand why you're saying this. But think about how the drafts have gone with Sean Payton versus last year with Dennis Allen, right? Dennis Allen, yes, he's a defensive coach, but they went offense in the 1st round last year. They traded up to go get a wide receiver. But I think it's actually the opposite of what you're thinking. Sean Payton was always you would always see defense, offensive line. And it was more about, he felt like he could find wide receivers in the mid to late rounds in the UDFA pool. He felt he could find running backs in the 3rd round, 4th round, 5th round, right? And what he wasn't as sure he could do was find a diamond in the rough defensive end and develop him, because that's just not where his forte was. And I think now you have Dennis Allen, and that is flipped, where I think you're going to end up seeing more top end picks spent on offensive players, because he feels comfortable finding that diamond in the rough edge rusher and bringing him in. So, like, I actually think this is in reverse of, like, now that you do have a defensive head coach, he's going to pick more premium offensive players, because he knows that he can juice the most out of the defense regardless of where you're using those picks.
Or like last year, that diamond in the rough cornerback, Alontae Taylor.
Right. And so you'll see, second, third round, fourth round, that's where he'll try to find his guys. Whereas at the first round, where you're getting kind of those blue chip prospects, you're like, oh, Pete, you want Chris Olave? We're going to go get you Chris Olave. You need a left tackle? We're going to go get you a left tackle. You want a running back? We're going to go get him. I don't think it's going to happen, but either way, I think that's the logic I would use if you're trying to sell me on Bijan Robinson at 29.
Oh, I'm still saying though, even in the first 2 days of the draft, I still think you could say the Saints will get a running back. I could see a third round or second round selection.
It's possible. I would guess fourth, and I would guess you're going mid tier, like an Evan Hull. I just don't think you're just spending so much at the position right now that I find it hard to believe. But it's really just a question of whether they really like a running back, and if they do, you can go get them. Here's Austin. I agree. He says that's the one thing I don't miss about Peyton is this quote. I like our receiver room about the Marquez Callaway, Lil Jordan Humphrey, Deontay Hardy receiver room. Very true. It's like, oh yeah, no, we're fine. Don't worry about it. We got this. Traquan Smith in the third round. We're good.
Yeah. That's a person that has managed to stick around though. As much as we like to take little jabs at Traquan, he seems to have, I guess, found his niche with this team.
Well, he's a guy who knows the offense, and they're gonna bring him back on a cheap deal. But like the fact is, he was the only wide receiver they took for like 4 years.
Yeah.
And you had Sean Payton, and again, it's just an example of like Sean Payton being like, I can wring the most out of anybody you give me. So I would rather have the offensive line, defensive line fully stocked. I want a full allotment of cornerbacks. I want everything that I can get in the top half of the draft that I don't have to worry about, because I want to worry about the offense. And so hopefully, like that is if you're a Saints fan and you're trying to find a silver lining of having Dennis Allen as the head coach, it is that I think you will be seeing a lot more skill positions on the first 2 days of the draft than you had under Sean Payton. And so that's my last take of the day.
Yeah, I would think a lot of folks were probably pretty taken back that Allen was so aggressive to go after Olave last year, kind of thing.
Yeah. It makes sense. Like, I get it. But yeah, I think it just is a sign of like, yeah, we don't have that kind of this self-proclaimed offensive guru anymore. And, we're gonna get more set it and forget it type offensive players. That's the way I kind of look at it. Like they're programmed. You don't have to worry about whether they can develop over time. They're supposed to be ready now. And that's Olave, and that's, first round offensive tackle, first round guard, that sort of thing.
Well, if it's more offensive linemen, like you said earlier, Saints fans are going to go batty, even though they should be used to it by now.
Well, everyone gets mad when they draft an offensive lineman, and then they also get mad halfway through the season when you're starting Calvin Throckmorton. So it's like you can only have so much. Like, I'm not gonna, like, if you're gonna complain about everything, and then anyway, that's the end. I said that was my last take, and so I'm done.
Right,
anyway, let's wrap that up. We've been on here for way too long. This is
I hear the March Madness music.
Yeah, gosh, I have like less than an hour to edit this and start watching UConn men. So go Huskies, UConn. Pride of stores. Yeah. This is Inside Black and Gold. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do that. You can follow me on Twitter at Jeff_Nowak. You can follow Steve at Steve Geller WWL. We're going to be hosting Sports Talk on Friday, 4 to 8 p.m. Tune in for that. WWL AM 870 FM 1053 and the Odyssey app. Call in at 504-260-1870. You can text as well. That's always fun. If you want to do so anonymously. And we'll talk to you. We have 4 hours to kill tomorrow, and we just spent 2 hours talking, so I don't know what we're going to talk about, but
we'll just replay our 2 hours for two.
There we go. Yeah, we'll just literally put this on and then sit there and watch basketball. How about that?
Right, exactly. Well, what's cool is we'll be on. We'll see the women's basketball team with their Sweet 16 matchup. And I guess we'll recap the LSU baseball game since they started early now.
Yep. No good old noon starts. But all right. That's it. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Thanks, everyone who dropped in a comment, question. As always, This is Inside Black and Gold. Who dat?
Appreciate you folks.
End scene.